Um, yeah, it's that time again. As you can see, I'm a little bit more in the dark because I just thought it was a little bit more appropriate. Honestly, I didn't know that you could you could have like little lighting in VTS. I only just learned that these past couple days. It was kind of cool to mess around with, but I guess we're just gonna kind of be in the dark right now. I have my tea right now. And also, an important update for those of you who are unaware. My voice is mostly back to its normal state now. You can't tell because I'm trying to be a little bit more like soft-spoken right now, as is tradition. But I realized this morning that I can actually like do stuff and it won't hurt anymore. So I guess for all intents and purposes, my sore throat's gone. This tea is still a little bit hot, but I think that's a good thing. Let's see. Actually, let me take another sip because I didn't get to really like have much tea before stream started. Honestly, I was a little bit short for time, like right before stream, because I ordered a new office chair this past yesterday actually. They said it was gonna be 1 day shipping, but obviously from the past I don't really like believe that sort of thing is easy anymore. But this time they actually pulled through with their promises, and it got delivered like about an hour before stream or thereabouts. I spent like about 30 to 45 minutes just putting everything together, but it's nice. It rotates and it rolls a lot easier, so I'm happy with that. And let me just take one more sip of my tea because I really need like my vocal cords to be warmed up. But yeah, everything's coming back up from like the slump I had earlier this week. At least I think so. But yeah, tonight we're gonna be reading The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. You know, I said this on my last stream, but I didn't really like, I didn't know that there was like I didn't know that The Last Unicorn was based on a book. I always thought that the movie was just like its own standalone thing, but I guess it was like based off of a novel. I mean, it's a very short novel. It's only about like 130 pages or something, so I feel like we could probably knock this out in like 2 very easygoing streams, because last time when I was reading Misery, I like really had to just like crank out some endurance because that book was like 450 pages long or something. Probably not the best book for me to start doing this whole reading stream to, but it was interesting and I had fun with it. And this one should be a lot more like easy going, so hopefully it'll be better on my throat. You can still hear that my throat's still being warmed up, so Alright, so I guess I mean the chapters in this book, they're a little more like staggered, like chapters are normally like set to be. So I might have to just like pause halfway through every so often to take a sip of tea, because when I was reading Misery I could just like take a sip at the end of every chapter because there were like 40 chapters and each one was like 5 pages long or something. But yeah. Hopefully my voice doesn't give out on me. It's honestly surprisingly unrefined right now, but hopefully I'll be able to like find my sea legs here. And I guess with that, we're just gonna go ahead and get started. To the memory of Dr. Ulfert Dapper, who saw a wild unicorn in the Maine woods in 1673, and for Robert Nathan, who has seen one or two in Los Angeles. Actually, let me get a sip of water just before I start. I gotta have I gotta get the pipes lubed up. Alright. The unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived all alone. She was very old, though she did not know it, and she was no longer the careless color of sea foam, but rather the color of snow falling on a moonlit night. But her eyes were still clear and unwearied, and she still moved like a shadow on the sea. She did not look anything like a horned horse as unicorns are often pictured, being smaller and cloven-hooved, and possessing that oldest, wildest grace that horses have never had, that deer have only in a shy, thin imitation and goats in dancing mockery. Her neck was long and slender, making her head seem smaller than it was, and the mane that fell almost to the middle of her back was as soft as dandelion fluff and fine as cirrus. She had pointed ears and thin legs, with feathers of white hair at the ankles, and the long horn above her eyes shone and shivered with its own seashell light, even in the deepest midnight. She had killed dragons with it, and healed a king whose poisoned wound would not close, and knocked down ripe chestnuts for bear cubs. Unicorns are immortal. It is their nature to live alone in one place, usually a forest where there is a pool clear enough for them to see themselves. For they are a little vain, knowing themselves to be the most beautiful creatures in all the world, and magic besides. They mate very rarely, and no place is more enchanted than one where a unicorn has been born. The last time she had seen another unicorn, the young virgins who still came seeking her now and then had called to her in a different tongue. But then, she had no idea of months and years and centuries, or even of seasons. It was always spring in her forest, because she lived there, and she wandered all day amongst the great beech trees, keeping watch over animals that lived in the ground and under bushes, in nests and caves, earths and treetops. Generation after generation, wolves and rabbits alike, they hunted and loved and had children and died, and as the unicorn did none of these things, she never grew tired of watching them. One day it happened that two men with long bows rode through her forest hunting for deer. The unicorn followed them, moving so warily that not even the horses knew she was near. The sight of men filled her with an old, slow, strange mixture of tenderness and terror. She never let one see her if she could help it, but she liked to watch them ride by and hear them talking. "I mislike the feel of this forest," the elder of the two hunters grumbled. "Creatures that live in a unicorn's wood learn a little magic of their own in time, mainly concerned with disappearing. We'll find no game here." "Unicorns are long gone," the second man said. "If indeed they ever were. This is a forest like any other." "Then why do the leaves never fall here, or the snow? I tell you, there was one unicorn left in the world. Good luck to the lonely old thing, I say. And as long as it lives in this forest, there won't be a hunter takes so long as a titmouse home at his saddle. Ride on, you'll see. I know their ways, unicorns." "From books," answered the other. "Only from books and tales and songs. Not in the reign of 3 kings has there ever been a whisper of a unicorn seen in this country or any other. You know no more about unicorns than I do, for I've read the same books and heard the same stories, and I've never seen one either." The first hunter was silent for a time, and the second whistled sourly to himself. Then the first said, "My great-grandmother saw a unicorn once. She used to tell me about it when I was little." "Oh, indeed? And did she capture it with a golden girdle?" "No, she didn't have one. You don't have to have a golden girdle to catch a unicorn. That part's the fairy tale. You only need to be pure of heart." Yes, the younger man chuckled. Did she ride her unicorn then? Bareback under the trees like a nymph in the early days of the world? My great-grandmother was afraid of large animals, said the first hunter. She didn't ride it, but she sat very still, and the unicorn put its head in her lap and fell asleep. My great-grandmother never moved till it woke. What did it look like? Pliny describes the unicorn as being very ferocious, similar to the rest of its body to a horse, with the head of a deer, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a bear, a deep bellowing voice, and a single black horn, 2 cubits in length. And the Chinese, my great-grandmother, said only that the unicorn had a good smell. She never could abide the smell of any beast, even a cat or a cow, let alone a wild thing. But she loved the smell of the unicorn. She began to cry once telling me about it. Of course, she was a very old woman then, and cried at anything that reminded her of her youth. Let's turn around and hunt somewhere else, the second hunter said abruptly. The unicorn stepped softly into a thicket as they turned their horses, and took up the trail only when they were well ahead of her once more. The men rode in silence until they were near the edge of the forest, when the second hunter asked quietly, "Why did they go away, do you think? If ever there were such things." "Who knows? Times change. Would you call this age a good one for unicorns?" "No, but I wonder if any man before us ever thought his time was a good time for unicorns. And it seems to me now that I have heard stories, but I was sleepy with wine, or I was thinking of something else. Well, no matter. There's light enough yet to hunt if we hurry. Come." They broke out of the woods, kicked their horses to a gallop, and dashed away. But before they were out of sight, the first hunter looked back over his shoulder and called, just as though he could see the unicorn standing in the shadow, "Stay where you are, poor beast. This is no world for you. Stay in your forest and keep your trees green and your friends long-lived. Pay no mind to young girls, for they never become anything more than silly old women. And good luck to you." The unicorn stood still at the edge of the forest and said aloud, "I am the only unicorn there is." They were the first words she had spoken, even to herself, in more than 100 years. I'm gonna take a tea break. Hi, Huntlich. Hello. That can't be, she thought. She had never minded being alone, never seeing another unicorn, because she had always known that there were others like her in the world, and a unicorn needs no more than that for company. But I would know if all the others were gone. I'd be gone too. Nothing can happen to them that does not happen to me. Her own voice frightened her and made her want to be running. She moved along the dark depths of her forest, swift and shining, passing through sudden clearings unbearably brilliant with grass or soft with shadow, aware of everything around her, from the weeds that brushed her ankles to insect-quick flickers of blue and silver as the wind lifted the leaves. Oh, I could never leave this. I never could. Not if I really were the only unicorn in the world. I know how to live here. I know how everything smells and tastes and is. What could I ever search for in the world except this again? But when she stopped running at last and stood still, listening to the crows and a quarrel of squirrels over her head, she wondered, but suppose they are riding together, somewhere far away. What if they are hiding and waiting for me? From that first moment of doubt, there was no peace for her. From the time she first imagined leaving her forest, she could not stand in one place without wanting to be somewhere else. She trotted up and down beside her pool, restless and unhappy. Unicorns are not meant to make choices. She said no, and yes, and no again, day and night. And for the first time she began to feel the minutes crawling over her like worms. I will not go. Because men have seen no unicorns for a while does not mean they have all vanished. Even if it were true, I would not go. I live here. But at last she woke up in the middle of one warm night and said, "Yes, but now." She hurried through her forest, trying to look at nothing and smell nothing, trying not to feel her earth under her cloven hoofs. The animals who move in the dark, the owls and the foxes and the deer, raised their heads as she passed by, but she would not look at them. I must go quickly, she thought, and come back as soon as I can. Maybe I won't have to go very far, but whether I find the others or not, I will come back very soon as I can. Under the moon, the road that ran from the edge of her forest gleamed like water, but when she stepped out onto it, away from the trees, she felt how hard it was and how long. She had almost turned back then, but instead she took a deep breath of the woods air that still drifted to her, and held it in her mouth like a flower, as long as she could. Let me take a sip of water. The long road hurried to nowhere and had no end. It ran through villages and small towns, flat country and mountains, stony barrens and meadows springing out of stones, but it belonged to none of these, and it never rested anywhere. It rushed the unicorn along, tugging at her feet like the tide, fretting at her, never letting her be quiet and listen to the air as she was used to do. Her eyes were always full of dust, and her mane was stiff and heavy with dirt. Time had always passed by her in the forest, but now it was she who passed through time as she traveled. The color of the trees changed, and the animals along the way grew heavy coats and lost them again. The clouds crept or hurried before the changing winds, and were pink and gold in the sun, or livid with storm. Wherever she went, she searched for her people, but she found no trace of them. And in all the tongues she heard spoken along the road, there was not even a word for them anymore. Early one morning, about to turn off the road to sleep, she saw a man hoeing in his garden. Knowing that she should hide, she stood still instead and watched him work, until he straightened and saw her. He was fat, and his cheeks jumped with every step he took. "Oh," he said. "Oh, you're beautiful." When he tugged off his belt, made a loop in it, and moved clumsily towards her, the unicorn was more pleased than frightened. The man knew what she was, and what he himself was for, to hoe turnips and pursue something that shone and could run faster than he could. She sidestepped his first lunge as lightly as though the wind of it had blown her out of his reach. "I have been hunted with bells and banners in my time," she told him. "Men knew that the only way to hunt me was to make the chase so wondrous that I would come near to see it. And even so, it was never once captured." "My foot must have slipped," said the man. "Steady now, you pretty thing." "I've never really understood," the unicorn mused as the man picked himself up, "what you dream of doing with me once you've caught me." The man leaped again, and she slipped away from him like rain. "I don't think you know yourselves," she said. Steady, steady, easy now." The man's sweating face was striped with dirt, and he could hardly get his breath. "Pretty," he gasped. "You pretty little mare." "Mare." The unicorn trumpeted the words so shrilly that the man stopped pursuing her and clapped his hands to his ears. "Mare?" she demanded. "I, a horse? Is that what you take me for? Is that what you see?" "Good horse," the fat man panted. He leaned on the fence and wiped his face. "Cur you up, clean you off, you'll be the prettiest old mare anywhere." He reached out with the belt again. "Take you to the fair," he said. "Come on, horse." "A horse," the unicorn said. "That's what you were trying to capture. A white mare with her mane full of burrs." As the man approached her, she hooked her horn through the belt, jerked it out of his grasp, and hurled it across the road into a patch of daisies. "A horse, am I?" she snorted. "A horse indeed." Let me take a sip. For a moment, the man was very close to her, and her great eyes stared into his own, which were small and tired and amazed. Then she turned and fled up the road, running so swiftly that those who saw her exclaimed, "Now there's a horse! There's a real horse!" One old man said quietly to his wife, "That's an Arab horse. I was on a ship with an Arab horse once." From that time, the unicorn avoided towns, even at night, unless there was no way at all to go around them. Even so, there were a few men who gave chase, but always to a wandering white mare, never in the gay and reverent manner proper to the pursuit of a unicorn. They came with ropes and nets and baits of sugar lumps, and they whistled and called her Bess and Nellie. Sometimes she would slow down enough to let their horses catch her scent, and then watch as the beasts reared and wheeled and ran away with their terrified riders. The horses always knew her. How can it be, she wondered. I suppose I could understand it if men had simply forgotten unicorns, or if they had changed so that they hated all unicorns now and tried to kill them when they saw them. But not to see them at all, to look at them and see something else? What do they look like to one another then? What did trees look like to them? Or houses, or real horses, or their own children? Sometimes she thought, if men no longer know what they were looking at, there may well be unicorns in the world yet, unknown and glad of it. But she knew beyond both hope and vanity that men had changed, and the world with them, because the unicorns were gone. Yet she went on along that hard road, although each day she wished a little more that she had never left her forest. Then one afternoon, the butterfly wobbled out of a breeze and lit on the tip of her horn. He was velvet all over, dark and dusty, with golden spots on his wings, and he was as thin as a flower petal. Dancing along her horn, he saluted her with his curling feelers. "I am a roving gambler. How do you do?" The unicorn laughed for the first time in her travels. "Butterfly, what are you doing out on such a windy day?" she asked him. "You'll take cold and die long before your time." "Death takes what man could keep," said the butterfly, "and leaves what man could lose. Blow, wind, and crack your cheeks. I warm my hands before the fire of life and get four-way relief." He glimmered like a scrap of owl light on her horn. "Do you know what I am, Butterfly?" Unicorn asked hopefully, and he replied, "Excellent well, you're a fishmonger. You're my everything. You're my sunshine. You are old and gray and full of sleep. You're my pickle face, consumptive Mary Jane." He paused, fluttering his wings against the wind, and added conversationally, "Your name is a golden bell hung in my heart. I would break my body to pieces to call you once by your name." "Say my name, then," the unicorn begged him. "If you know my name, tell it to me." "Rumpelstiltskin," the butterfly answered happily. "Gotcha. You don't get no medal." He jigged and twinkled on her horn, singing, "Won't you come home, Bill Bailey? Won't you come home?" Where once he could not go. "Buckle down, Winsocki. Go and catch a falling star. Clay lies still, but blood's a rover. So I should be called Kill Devil all the parish over." His eyes were gleaming scarlet in the glow of the unicorn's horn. She sighed and plodded on, both amused and disappointed. "It serves you right," she told herself. "You know better than to expect a butterfly to know your name. All they know are songs and poetry, and anything else they hear. They mean well, but they can't keep things straight. And why should they? They die so soon." The butterfly swaggered before her eyes, singing, "1, 2, 3, O'Larry," as he whirled, chanting, "Not, I'll not, carry on comfort, look down that lonesome road. For oh, what damned minutes tells he o'er who dotes, yet doubts. Hasten, mirth, and bring with thee a host of furious fancies whereof I am commander, which will be on sale for 3 days only at bargain summer prices. I love you, oh the horror, and aroint thee, which aroint thee. Indeed and truly you've chosen a bad place to be layman. Willow, willow, willow." His voice tinkled in the unicorn's head like silver money falling. He traveled with her for the rest of the waning day, But when the sun went down and the sky was full of rosy fish, he flew off her horn and hovered in the air before her. "I must take the A train," he said politely. Against the clouds she could see that his velvet wings were ribbed with delicate black veins. "Farewell," she said. "I hope you hear many more songs." Which was the best way she could think of to say goodbye to a butterfly. But instead of leaving her, he fluttered above her head, looking suddenly less dashing and a little nervous in the blue evening air. "Fly away," she urged him. "It's too cold for you to be out." But the butterfly still dallied, humming to himself. "They ride that horse you call the Macedoni," he intoned absent-mindedly. And then very clearly, "Unicorn, Old French, unicorn, Latin, unicornus, literally one-horned, unus, one, and cornu, a horn. A fabulous animal resembling a horse with one horn. Oh, I am a cook and a captain bold, and the mate of the Nancy Brig. Has anybody here seen Kelly?" He strutted joyously in the air, and the first fireflies blinked around him in wonder and grave doubt. The unicorn was so startled and so happy to hear her name spoken at last that she overlooked the remark about the horse. "Oh, you do know me," she cried, and the breath of her delight blew the butterfly 20 feet away. When he came scrambling back to her, she pleaded, "Butterfly, if you really know who I am, tell me if you have ever seen anyone like me. Tell me which way I must go to find them. Where have they gone?" "Butterfly, butterfly, where shall I hide?" he sang in the fading light. "The sweet and bitter fool will presently appear. Christ, that my love were in my arms, and I in my bed again." He rested on the unicorn's horn once more, and she could feel him trembling. "Please," she said, "all I want to know is that there are other unicorns somewhere in the world. Butterfly, tell me that there are still others like me, and I will believe you and go home to my forest. I have been away so long, and I said that I would come back soon." "Over the mountains of the moon," the butterfly began, "down the valley of the shadow, ride, boldly ride." Then he stopped suddenly and said in a strange voice, "No, no, listen. Don't listen to me, listen. You can find your people if you are brave. They passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footprints. Let nothing you dismay, but don't be half safe." His wings brushed against the unicorn's skin. "The Red Bull," she asked. "What is the Red Bull?" The butterfly started to sing, "Follow me down, follow me down, follow me down, follow me down." But then he shook his head wildly and recited, "His firstling bull has majesty, and his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he shall push the peoples, all of them, to the ends of the earth." "Listen, listen, listen quickly." "I am listening," the unicorn cried. "Where are my people, and what is the Red Bull?" But the butterfly swooped close to her ear, laughing. "I have nightmares about crawling around on the ground," he sang. "The little dogs, Tray, Blanche, Sue, they bark at me. The little snakes, they hiss at me. The beggars are coming to town. Then at last come the clams." For a moment more he danced in the dusk before her. Then he shivered away into the violet shadows by the roadside, chanting defiantly, "It's you or me, moth. Hand to hand to hand to hand to hand." The last the unicorn saw of him was a tiny skittering between the trees, and her eyes might have deceived her, for the night was full of wings now. "At least he did recognize me," she thought sadly. "That means something." But she answered herself, no, that means nothing at all, except that somebody once made up a song about unicorns or a poem. But the Red Bull, what could he have meant by that? Another song, I suppose. She walked on slowly, and the night drew close about her. The sky was low and almost pure black, save for one spot of yellowing silver where the moon paced behind the thick clouds. The unicorn sang softly to herself, a song she had heard from a young girl singing in her forest long ago. "Sparrows and cats will live in my shoe, sooner than I will live with you. Fish will come walking out of the sea, Sooner than you will come back to me. Let me just sit. She did not understand the words, but the song made her think longingly of her home. It seemed to her that she had heard autumn beginning to shake the beech trees the very moment that she stepped out into the road. As she lay down in the cold grass and fell asleep, or at last she lay down in the cold grass and fell asleep. Unicorns are the wariest of all wild things, but they sleep soundly when they sleep. All the time, if she had not been dreaming of home, she would surely have aroused at the sound of wheels and jingling coming closer through the night. Even though the wheels were muffled in rags and the little bells wrapped in wool. But she was very far away, farther than the soft bells could go, and she did not wake. There were 9 wagons, each draped in black, each drawn by a lean black horse, and each bearing barred sides like teeth when the wind blew through the black hangings. The lead wagon was driven by a squat old woman, and it bore signs on its shrouded sides that said in big letters, Mommy Fortuna's Midnight Carnival. And below in smaller print, Creatures of the Night brought to light. When the first wagon drew even with the place where the unicorn lay asleep, the old woman suddenly pulled her black horse to a stop. All the other wagons stopped too and waited silently as the old woman swung herself to the ground with an ugly grace. Gliding close to the unicorn, she peered down at her for a long time and then said, Well, well, bless my old husk of a heart, and here I thought I'd seen the last of them. Her voice left a flavor of honey and gunpowder on the air. If he knew, she said, and she showed pebbly teeth as she smiled. But I don't think I'd tell him. I don't think I'll tell him. She looked back at the black wagons and snapped her fingers twice. The drivers of the second and third wagons got down and came toward her. One was short and dark and stony like herself. The other was a tall, thin man with an air of resolute bewilderment. He wore an old black cloak and his eyes were green. What do you see? The old woman asked the short man. Rook, what do you see lying there? Dead horse, he answered. No, not dead. Give it to the manticore, or the dragon. His chuckle sounded like matches striking. You're a fool, Mommy Fortuna said to him. Then to the other. What about you, wizard, seer, thaumaturge? What do you see with your sorcerer's sight? She joined with the man Rook in a wretchedy roar of laughter, but it ended when she saw that the tall man was still staring at the unicorn. Answer me, you juggler, she snarled. But the tall man did not turn his head. The old woman turned it for him, reaching out a crab-like hand to yank his chin around. His eyes fell before her yellow stare. A horse, he muttered. A white mare. Mommy Fortuna looked at him for a long time. You're a fool too, magician. She snickered at last. But a worse fool than Rook, and a more dangerous one. He lies only out of greed, but you lie out of fear. Or could it be kindness? The man said nothing, and Mommy Fortuna laughed by herself. All right, she said. It's a white mare. I want her for the carnival. The 9th cage is empty. I'll need rope, Rook said. He was about to turn away, but the old woman stopped him. The only rope that could hold her, she told him, would be the cord with which the old gods bound the Fenris wolf. That one was made of fish's breath, bird spittle, a woman's beard, the meowing of a cat, the sinews of a bear, and one thing more. I remember, mountain roots. Having none of these elements, nor dwarves to weave them for us, we'll have to do the best we can with iron bars. I'll put a sleep on her thus. And Mommy Fortuna's hands knitted the night air while she grumbled a few unpleasant words in her throat. There was a smell of lightning about the unicorn when the old woman had finished her spell. Now cage her, she said to the 2 men. She'll sleep till sunrise, whatever racket you make. Unless, in your accustomed stupidity, you touch her with your hands. Take the ninth cage to pieces and build it around her. But beware. The hand that so much as brushes her mane turns instantly to the donkey's hoof it deserves to be. Again she gazed mockingly at the tall, thin man. Your little tricks would be even harder for you than they already are, wizard, she said, wheezing. Get to work. These is not much dark left. When she was well out of earshot, sliding back into the shadow of her wagon as though she had just come out to mark the hour, the man named Rook spat and said curiously, Now I wonder what's worrying the old squid. What would it matter if we touched the beast? The magician answered him in a voice almost too soft to be heard. The touch of a human hand would wake her out of the deepest sleep the devil himself could lay on her. And Mommy Fortuna's no devil. She'd like us to think so, the dark man sneered. Donkey hoofs, gah. But he thrust his hands deep into his pockets. Why would the spell be broken? It's just an old white mare. But the magician was walking away toward the last of the black wagons. Hurry, he called over his shoulder. It will be day soon. It took them the rest of the night to pull down the ninth cage, bars and floor and roof, and then to put it back together around the sleeping unicorn. Rook was tugging at the door to make sure that it was securely locked when the gray trees in the east boiled over and the unicorn opened her eyes. The two men slipped hurriedly away, but the tall magician looked back in time to see the unicorn rise to her feet and stare at the iron bars, her low head swaying like the head of an old white horse. Alright, that's chapter 1. Love my tea. Oh god, that was so loud. I'm sorry. It like there was a little bit of there was a bit of like stuff like stuck to it was like it's like a little bit of like stuff. I guess like the teapot is like getting a little bit of drip down the side somehow. And then it kind of like fused itself to the base of the heating thingy with all the sugar in there and all that. Alright, so we'll be extra careful next time we try to pick that up. Noted. Let me take a sip of water too. Alright. On to chapter 2. The 9 black wagons of the Midnight Carnival seemed smaller by daylight and not menacing at all, but flimsy and fragile as dead leaves. Their draperies were gone, and they were now adorned with sad black banners cut from blankets, and stubby black ribbons that twitched in the breeze. They were arranged strangely in a scrubby field, a pentacle of cages enclosing a triangle, and Mommy Fortuna's wagon lumping in the center. This cage alone retained its black veil, concealing whatever it contained. Mommy Fortuna was nowhere to be seen. The man named Rook was leading a straggling crowd of country folk slowly from one cage to the next, commenting somberly on the beasts within. This here's the manticore. Man's head, lion's body, tail of a scorpion. Captured at midnight, eating werewolves to sweeten its breath. Creatures of night brought to light. Here's the dragon, breathes fire now and then. Usually at people who poke it, little boy. Its inside is an inferno, but its skin is so cold it burns. The dragon speaks 17 languages badly and is subject to gout. The satyr, ladies keep back, a real troublemaker. Captured under curious circumstances, revealed to gentlemen only, for a token fee after the show. Creatures of night. Standing by the unicorn's cage, which was one of the inner 3, the tall magician watched the procession proceeding around the pentacle. I shouldn't be here, he said to the unicorn. The old woman warned me to stay away from you. He chuckled pleasantly. She's mocked me from the day I joined her, but I have made her nervous all that time. The unicorn hardly heard him. She turned and turned in her prison, her body shrinking from the touch of the iron bars all around her. No creature of man's night loves cold iron, and while the unicorn could endure its presence, the murderous smell of it seemed to turn her bones to sand and her blood to rain. The bars of her cage must have had some sort of spell on them, for they never stopped whispering evilly to one another in clawed, pattering voices. The heavy lock giggled and whined like a mad monkey. "Tell me what you see," said the magician, as Mommy Fortuna said it to him. "Look at your fellow legends and tell me what you see." Rook's iron voice came clanging through the wan afternoon. "Gatekeeper of the underworld, 3 heads and a healthy coat of vipers, as you can see. Last seen above ground in the time of Hercules, who dragged him up under one arm. But we lured him to light again with the promises of a better life. Cerberus, look at those 6 cheated red eyes. You may look into them again one day. This way to the Midgard serpent, this way." The unicorn stared through the bars at the animal in the cage. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "It's only a dog," she whispered. "It's a hungry, unhappy dog with only 1 head and hardly any coat at all. The poor thing. How could they ever take it for Cerberus? Are they all blind?" "Look again," the magician said. "And the satyr," the unicorn continued. "The satyr is an ape, an old ape with a twisted foot. The dragon is a crocodile, much more likely to breathe fish than fire. And the great manticore is a lion. A perfectly good lion, but no more monstrous than the others. I don't understand." "It's got the whole world in its coils," Rook was droning. And once more the magician said, "Look again." Then, as though her eyes were getting used to darkness, the unicorn began to perceive a second figure in each cage. They loomed hugely over the captives of the midnight carnival, and yet they were joined to them. Stormy dreams sprung from a grain of truth. So there was a manticore, famine-eyed, slobber-mouthed, roaring, curving his deadly tail over his back until the poisoned spine lolled and nodded just above his ear. And there was a lion, too, tiny and absurd by comparison. Yet they were the same creature. The unicorn stamped in wonder. It was so in all the other cages. The shadowed dragon opened his mouth and hissed harmless fire to make the gapers gasp and cringe, while hell's snake-furred watchdog howled triple dooms and devastations down on his betrayers. And the satyr limped leering to the bars and beckoned young girls to impossible delights right there in public. As for the crocodile, the ape, and the sad dog, they faded steadily before the marvelous phantoms until they were only shadows themselves, even to the unicorn's undeceived eyes. "This is a strange sorcery," she said softly. "There's more meaning than magic to this." Yeah, take a sip. Ooh. The magician laughed with pleasure and great relief. Well said indeed. I know the old horror wouldn't dazzle you with her 2-penny spells." His voice grew hard and secret. "She's made her 3rd mistake now," he said. "And that's at least 2 too many for a tired old trickster like herself. The time draws near." "The time draws near," Rook was telling the crowd, as though he had overheard the magician. "Ragnarok. On that day, when the gods fall, the serpent of the Midgard will spit a storm of venom at great Thor himself, till he tumbles over like a poisoned fly. And so he waits for Judgment Day, and dreams about the part he'll play. It may be so, I couldn't say. Creatures of night, brought to light." The cage was filled with snake. There was no head to it, and no tail. Nothing but a wave of tarnished darkness rolling from one end of the cage to the other, leaving no room for anything but its own thunderous breathing. Only the unicorn saw, coiled in a corner, a baleful boa. brooding perhaps over its own judgment on the midnight carnival. But it was tiny and dim as the ghost of a worm in the serpent's shadow. A wondering gawk stuck up his hand and demanded of Rook, "If this big snake do be coiled around the world, as you say, how come you to be having a piece of it in your wagon? And if it can shatter the sea just by stretching of itself, what's to keep it from crawling off wearing your whole show like a necklace?" There were murmurs of agreement, and some of the murmurs began to back warily away. "I'm glad you asked me that, friend," Rook said with a scowl. "It just so happens that the Midgard serpent exists in like another space from ours, another dimension. Normally, therefore, he's invisible, but dragged into our world, as Thor hooked him once. He shows clear as lightning, which also visits us from somewhere else, where it might look quite different. And naturally, he might turn nasty if he knew that a bit of his tummy slack was on view daily, and Sundays and Mommy Fortuna's midnight carnival. But he don't know. He's got other things to think about than what becomes of his belly button, and we take our chances, as do you all, on his continued tranquility." He rolled and stretched the last word like dough, and his hearers laughed carefully. "Spells of seeming," the unicorn said. "She cannot make things, nor truly change them," added the magician. Her shabby skill lies in disguise, and even that knack would be beyond her, if it weren't for the eagerness of those gulls, those morks, to believe whatever comes easiest. She can't turn cream into butter, but she can give a lion the semblance of a manticore to eyes that want to see a manticore there. I would take a real manticore for a lion, a dragon for a lizard, and the Midgard serpent for an earthquake, and a unicorn for a white mare." The unicorn halted in her slow, desperate round of the cage, realizing for the first time that the magician understood her speech. He smiled, and she saw that his face was frighteningly young for a grown man, untraveled by time, unvisited by grief or wisdom. "I know you," he said. The bars whispered wickedly between them. Rook was leading the crowd to the inner cages now. The unicorn asked the tall man, "Who are you?" "I am called Schmendrick the magician," he answered. "You won't have heard of me." The unicorn came very near to explaining that it was hardly for her to have heard of one wizard or another, but something sad and valiant in his voice kept her from it. The magician said, "I entertain the sightseers as they gather for the show. Miniature magic, sleight of hand, flowers to flags and flags to fish, all accompanied by a persuasive patter and a suggestion that I could work more ominous wonders if I chose. It's not much of a job, but I've had worse, and I'll have better one day. This is not the end." I'm gonna take a sip of water. Man, I feel like I'm gonna get real tired of having to say Schmendrick all the time. I can already feel it. The unicorn came very... Oh, I already read that. Whoopsies. But the sound of his voice made the unicorn feel as though she were trapped forever, and once more she began pacing her cage, moving to keep her heart from bursting with the terror of being closed in. Rook was standing before a cage that contained nothing but a small brown spider weaving a modest web across the bars. "Arachne of Lydia," he told the crowd. "Guaranteed the greatest weaver in the world. Her fate's the proof of it. She had the bad luck to defeat the goddess Athena in a weaving contest. Athena was a real sore loser, and Arachne is now a spider, creating only for Mommy Fortuna's midnight carnival by special arrangement. Warp of snow and woof of flame, and never any two the same. Arachne." Strung on the loom of iron bars, the web was very simple and almost colorless, except for an occasional rainbow shiver when the spider scuttled out on it to put a thread right. But it drew the onlooker's eyes, and the unicorn's eyes as well, back and forth and steadily deeper, until they seemed to be looking down into the great rifts of the world, black fissures that widened remorselessly, and yet would not fall into pieces as long as Arachne's web held the world together. The unicorn shook herself free with a sigh and saw the real web again. It was very simple and almost colorless. "It isn't like the others," she said. "No," Schmendrick agreed grudgingly. "But there's no credit due to Mommy Fortuna for that. You see, the spider believes. She sees those cat's cradles herself and thinks them her own work. Belief makes all the difference to magic like Mommy Fortuna's. Why, if that troop of witlings withdrew their wonder, there would be nothing left of all her witchery but the sound of a spider weeping, and no one would hear it." The unicorn did not want to look into the web again. She glanced at the cage closest to her own, and suddenly felt the breath in her body turning to cold iron. There sat on an oaken perch a creature with the body of a great bronze bird and a hag's face, clenched and deadly as the talons with which she gripped the wood. She had the shaggy round ears of a bear, but down her scaly shoulders, mingling with the bright knives of her plumage, there fell hair the color of moonlight, thick and youthful around the hating human face. She glittered, but to look at her was to feel the light going out of the sky. Catching sight of the unicorn, she made a queer sound like a hiss and a chuckle together. The unicorn said quietly, "This one is real. This is the harpy Seleno." Schmendrick's face had gone the color of oatmeal. "The old woman caught her by chance," he whispered. "Asleep as she took you. But it was an ill fortune, and they both know it. Mommy Fortuna's craft is just sure enough to hold the monster, but its mere presence is wearing all her spells so thin that in a little time she won't have enough power left to fry an egg. She should never have done it, never meddled with a real harpy, a real unicorn. The truth melts her magic always, but she cannot keep from trying to make it serve her. But this time, Sister of the Rainbow, believe it or not," they heard Rook braying to the awed onlookers. "Her name means the Dark One, the one whose wings blacken the sky before a storm. She and her two sweet sisters nearly starved the King Phineas to death by snatching and befouling his food before he could eat it. But the sons of the North Wind made them quit that, didn't they, my beauty?" The harpy made no sound, and Rook grinned like a cage himself. "She put up a fiercer fight than all the others put together," he went on. "It was like trying to bind all hell with a hair. But Mommy Fortuna's powers are great enough even for that. Creatures of the night brought to light. Polly want a cracker?" Few in the crowd laughed. The harpy's talons tightened on her perch until the wood cried out. "You'll need to be free when she frees herself," the magician said. "She mustn't catch you caged." "I dare not touch the iron," the unicorn replied. My horn couldn't open the lock. My horn could open the lock, but I cannot reach it. I cannot get out." She was trembling with horror of the harpy, but her voice was quite calm. Schmendrick the magician drew himself up several inches taller than the unicorn would have thought possible. "Fear nothing," he began grandly. "For all my air of mystery, I have a feeling heart." But he was interrupted by the approach of Rook and his followers, grown quieter than the grubby gang who had giggled at the manticore. The magician fled, calling back softly, "Don't be afraid, Schmendrick is with you. Do nothing till you hear from me." His voice drifted to the unicorn, so faint and lonely that she was not sure whether she actually heard it or only felt it brush against her. It was growing dark. The crowd stood in front of her cage, peering in at her with a strange shyness. Rook said, "The unicorn," and stepped aside. She heard hearts bounce, tears brewing, and breath going backward, but nobody said a word. By the sorrow and loss and sweetness in their faces, she knew that they recognized her, and she accepted their hunger as her homage, or homage, rather. It's a French word. She thought of the hunter's great-grandmother and wondered what it must be like to grow old and to cry. "Most shows," said Rook after a time, would end here. For what could they possibly present after a genuine unicorn? But Mommy Fortuna's Midnight Carnival holds one more mystery yet. A demon more destructive than the dragon, more monstrous than the manticore, more hideous than the harpy, more hideous than the harpy, and certainly more universal than the unicorn. He waved his hand toward the last wagon, and the black hangings began to wriggle open, though there was no one pulling them. "Behold her," Rook cried. "Behold the last, the very end. Behold Ellie." Inside the cage, it was darker than the evening, and cold stirred behind the bars like a live thing. Something moved in the cold, and the unicorn saw Ellie, an old, bony, ragged woman who crouched in the cage, rocking and warming herself before a fire that was not there. She looked so frail that the weight of the darkness should have crushed her, and so helpless and alone that the watchers should have rushed forward in pity to free her. Instead, they began to back silently away, for all the world as though Ellie were stalking them. But she was not even looking at them. She sat in the dark and creaked a song to herself in a voice that sounded like a saw going through a tree, and like a tree getting ready to fall. "What is plucked will grow again. What is slain lives on. What is stolen will remain. What is gone is gone." "She doesn't look like much, does she?" Rook asked. "But no hero can stand before her. No god can wrestle her down. No magic can keep her out or in, for she's no prisoner of ours. Even while we exhibit her here, she is walking among you, touching and talking, for Ellie is old age." The cold of the cage reached out to the unicorn, and wherever it touched her, she grew lame and feeble. She felt herself withering, loosening, felt her beauty leaving her with her breath. Ugliness swung from her mane, dragged down her head, stripped her tail, gaunted her body, ate up her coat, and ravaged her mind with remembrance of what she had once been. Somewhere nearby, the harpy made her low, eager sound, but the unicorn would gladly have huddled in the shadow of her bronze wings to hide from this last demon. Ellie's song sawed away at her heart. "What is sea-born dies on land, soft is trod upon. What is given burns the hand. What is gone is gone." The show was over. The crowd was stealing away, no one alone, but in couples and fews and several, strangers holding strangers' hands, looking back often to see if Ellie were following. Rook called plaintively, "Won't the gentleman wait to hear the story about the satyr?" and sent a sour yowl of laughter chasing their slow flight. Creatures of night brought to light. They struggled through the stiffening air past the unicorn's cage and on away, with Rook's laughter yapping them home, and Ellie still singing. "This is illusion," the unicorn told herself. "This is illusion," and somehow raised a head heavy with death to stare deep into the dark of the last cage and see, not old age, but Mommy Fortuna herself, stretching and snickering and clambering to the ground with her old eerie ease. And the unicorn knew then that she had not become mortal and ugly at all, but she did not feel beautiful again. Perhaps that was illusion too, she thought wearily. "I enjoyed that," Mommy Fortuna said to Rook. "I always do. I guess I'm just stage-struck at heart." "You better check on that damn harpy," Rook said. I could feel her working loose this time. It was like I was a rope holding her, and she was untying me. He shuddered and lowered his voice. "Get rid of her," he said hoarsely, "before she scatters us across the sky like bloody clouds. She thinks about it all the time. I can feel her thinking about it." "Fool, be still." The witch's own voice was fierce with fear. "I can turn her into wind if she escapes, or into snow, or into 7 notes of music. But I choose to keep her. No other witch in the world holds a harpy captive, and none ever will. I would keep her if I could do it only by feeding her a piece of your liver every day. Oh, that's nice, Rook said. He sidled away from her. What if she only wanted your liver, he demanded. What will you do then? Feed her yours anyway, Mommy Fortuna said. She wouldn't know the difference. Harpies aren't bright. Let me take sip time. Alone in the moonlight, the old woman glided from cage to cage, rattling locks and prodding her enchantments as a housewife squeezes melons in the market. When she came to the harpy's cage, the monster made a sound as shrill as a spear and spread the horrid glory of its wings. For a moment it seemed to the unicorn that the bars of the cage began to wriggle and run like rain. But Mommy Fortuna cracked her twiggy fingers and the bars were iron again, and the harpy sank down on its perch, waiting. Not yet, the witch said. Not yet. They stared at each other with the same eyes. Mommy Fortuna said, You're mine. If you kill me, you're mine. The harpy did not move, but a cloud put out the moon. Oops. Not yet, Mommy Fortuna said, and she turned toward the unicorn's cage. Well, she said in her sweet, smoky voice, I had you frightened for a little while, didn't I? She laughed with a sound like snakes hurrying through mud and strolled closer. Whatever your friend the magician might say, she went on, I must have some small art after all. To trick a unicorn into believing herself old and foul. That takes a certain skill, I'd say. And is it a 2-penny spell that holds the Dark One prisoner? No other till I. The unicorn replied, Do not boast, old woman. Your death sits in that cage and hears you. Yes, Mommy Fortuna said calmly, but at least I know where it is. You were out on the road hunting for your own death. She laughed again. And I know where that one is too, but I spared you the finding of it, and you should be grateful for that. Forgetting where she was, the unicorn pressed forward against the bars. They hurt her, but she did not draw back. The Red Bull, she said. Where can I find the Red Bull? Mommy Fortuna stepped very close to the cage. The Red Bull of King Haggard, she muttered. So you know of the bull. She showed 2 of her teeth. Well, he'll not have you, she said. You belong to me. The unicorn shook her head. You know better, she answered gently. Free the harpy while there is time, and set me free as well. Keep your poor shadows if you will, but let us go. The witch's stagnant eyes blazed up so savagely bright that a ragged company of Luna moths, off to a night's revel, fluttered straight into them and sizzled into snowy ashes. I'd quit show business first, she snarled. Trudging through eternity, hauling my homemade horrors. Do you think that was my dream when I was young and evil? Do you think I chose this meager magic sprung of stupidity because I never knew the true witchery? I played tricks with dogs and monkeys because I cannot touch the grass, but I know the difference. And now you ask me to give up the sight of you, the presence of your power? I told Rook I'd feed his liver to the harpy if I had to, and so I would. And to keep you I'd take your friend Schmendrick and I'd... She raised herself to gibberish and at last to silence. Speaking of livers, the unicorn said, real magic can never be made by offering up someone else's liver. You must tear out your own and not expect to get it back. The true witches know that. A few grains of sand rustled down Mommy Fortuna's cheek as she stared at the unicorn. All witches weep like that. She turned and walked swiftly toward her wagon, but suddenly she turned again and grinned her rubbly grin. But I tricked you twice anyway, she said. Did you really think that those gogglers knew you for yourself without any help from me? No, I had to give you an aspect they could understand, and a horn they could see. These days, it takes a cheap carnival witch to make folk recognize a real unicorn. You do much better to stay with me and be false, For in this whole world, only the Red Bull will know you when he sees you. She disappeared into her wagon, and the harpy let the moon come out again. Ugh. Man, I can't believe we're only like 20 pages in. I mean, to be fair, the like 20 pages means a lot like more in the context of this, because there's only like 120 of like actual story in here. All right, let me take sips. I get my sips in. Ah, one more tea. There we go. Schmendrick came back a little before dawn, slipping between the cages as silently as water. Only the harpy made a sound as he went by. I couldn't get away any sooner, he told the unicorn. She set Rook to watching me, and he hardly ever sleeps. But I asked him a riddle, and it always takes him all night to solve riddles. Next time I'll tell him a joke and keep him busy for a week. The unicorn was gray and still. There is magic on me, she said. Why did you not tell me? I thought you knew, the magician answered gently. After all, didn't you wonder how it could be that they recognized you? Then he smiled, which made him look a little older. No, of course not. You never would wonder about that. There has never been a spell on me before, the unicorn said. She shivered long and deep. There has never been a world in which I was not known. I know exactly how you feel, Schmendrick said eagerly. The unicorn looked at him out of dark, endless eyes, and he smiled nervously and looked at his hands. It's a rare man who is taken for what he truly is, he said. Yeah, I need some water. I'm starting to like get dry mouth. It's a rare man who is taken for what he truly is, he said. There is much misjudgment in the world. Now I knew you for a unicorn when I first saw you, and I know that I am your friend. Yet you take me for a clown, or a clod, or a betrayer, and so I must be if you see me so. The magic on you is only magic, and will vanish as soon as you are free, but the enchantment of error that you put on me I must wear forever in your eyes. We are not always what we seem, and hardly ever what we dream. Still I have read, or heard it sung, that unicorns when time was young could tell the difference twixt the two, the false shining and the true, the lips' laugh and the heart's rue. His quiet voice lifted as the sky grew lighter, and for a moment the unicorn could not hear the bars whining, or the soft ringing of the harpy's wings. I thank you, my friend, she said. Will you help me? If not you, no one, the magician answered. You're my last chance. One by one, the sad beasts of the midnight carnival came whimpering, sneezing, and shuddering awake. One had been dreaming of rocks and bugs and tender leaves, another of bounding through high, hot grass, a third of mud and blood, and one had dreamed of a hand scratching the lonely place between its ears, or behind its ears. Only the harpy had not slept, and now she was staring into the sun without blinking. Schmendrick said, if she frees herself first, we are lost. They heard Rook's voice nearby. That voice always sounded nearby, calling, Schmendrick, hey Schmendrick, I got it. It's a coffee pot, right? The magician began to move slowly away. Tonight, he murmured to the unicorn. Trust me till dawn. And was gone with a flap and a scramble, seeming as before to leave part of himself behind. Rook loped by the cage a moment later, all deadly economy. Hidden in her black wagon, Mommy Fortuna grumbled Ellie's song to herself. Here is there and high is low, all may be undone. What is true no two men know, what is gone is gone. I gotta keep like drinking water because I'm getting dry mouth. Alright, just had to like I had to like get it worked into my like mouth meat, you know? Soon a new catch of spectators began to come sauntering up to see the show. Rook called them in crying creatures of night, like an iron parrot, and Schmendrick stood on a box and did tricks. The unicorn watched him with great interest and a growing uncertainty, not of his heart, but of his craft. He made an entire sow out of a sow's ear, turned a sermon into a stone, a glass of water into a handful of water, and a 5 of spades into a 12 of spades, and a rabbit into a goldfish that drowned. Each time he conjured up confusion, he glanced quickly at the unicorn with eyes that said, "Oh, but you know what I really did." Once he changed a dead rose into a seed. The unicorn liked that, even though it did turn out to be a radish seed. I gotta itch my nose. Oh, yeah. The show began again. Once more, Rook led the crowd from one of Mommy Fortuna's poor fables to another. The dragon blazed, Cerberus howled for hell to come up and help him, and the satyr tempted women until they wept. They squinted and pointed at the manticore's yellow tusks and swollen sting, grew still at the thought of the Midgard serpent, and wondered at Arachne's new web, which was like a fisherman's net with the dripping moon in it. Each of them took it for a real web, but only the spider believed that it held the real moon. This time, Rook did not tell the story of King Phineas and the Argonauts. Indeed, he hurried his sightseers past the harpy's cage as quickly as he could, gabbling only her name and the meaning of it. The harpy smiled. Nobody saw her smile except the unicorn, and she wished that she had chanced to be looking somewhere else at the time. When they stood in front of her cage, gazing silently at her, the unicorn thought bitterly, "Their eyes are so sad. How much sadder would they be, I wonder, if the spell that disguises me dissolved and they were left standing if they were left standing at a God. I wonder if the spell that disguises me dissolved and they were left staring at a common white mare. The witch is right. No one would know me." But then a soft voice, rather like the voice of Schmendrick the magician, said inside her, "But their eyes are so sad." And when Rook shrieked, "Behold the very end," and the black hangings slithered back to reveal Ellie, mumbling in the cold and the darkness, the unicorn felt the same helpless fear of growing old that set the crowd to flight, even though she knew that it was only Mommy Fortuna in the cage. She thought, the witch knows more than she knows she knows. Gotta take another sip. Night came quickly, perhaps because the harpy hurried it on. The sun sank into dirty clouds like a stone into the sea, and with about as much chance of rising again. And there was no moon or any stars. Mommy Fortuna made her gliding rounds of the cages. The harpy did not move when she drew near, and that made the old woman stand and stare at her for a long while. "Not yet," she muttered at last. "Not yet." But her voice was weary and doubtful. She peered briefly at the unicorn, her eyes a stir of yellow in the greasy gloom. "Well, one day more," she said in a cackling sigh, and turned away again. There was no sound in the carnival after she was gone. All the beasts were asleep save the spider, who wove, and the harpy, who waited. Yet the night creaked tighter and tighter until the unicorn expected it to split wide open, ripping a seam down the sky to reveal more bars, she thought. Where is the magician? At last he came hurrying through the silence, spinning and dancing like a cat in the cold, stumbling over shadows. When he reached the unicorn's cage, he made a joyful bow to her and said proudly, "Schmendrick is with you." In the cage nearest to hers, the unicorn heard the edge shivering of bronze. "I think we have very little time," she said. "Can you truly set me free?" The tall man smiled, and even his pale, solemn fingers grew merry. I told you that the witch has made 3 great mistakes. Your capture was the last, and the taking of the harpy the second, because you are both real. And Mommy Fortuna can no more make you hers than she can make the winter a day longer. But to take me for a mountebank like herself, that was her first and fatal folly. For I too am real. I am Schmendrick the Magician, the last of the red-hot swamis, and I am older than I look. Where is the other? The unicorn asked. Schmendrick was pushing back his sleeves. Don't worry about Rook. I asked him another riddle, one that has no answer. He may never move again. He spoke 3 angled words and snapped his fingers. Cage disappeared. The unicorn found herself standing in a grove of trees. Orange and lemon, pear and pomegranate, almond and acacia, with soft spring earth under her feet and the sky growing over her. Her heart turned light as smoke, and she gathered up the strength of her body for a great bound into the sweet night. But she let the leap drift out of her untaken, for she knew, although she could not see them, that the bars were still there. She was too old not to know. I'm sorry, Schmendrick said somewhere in the dark. I would have liked it to be the spell that freed you. Now he sang something cold and low, and the strange trees blew away like dandelion down. This is a surer spell, he said. The bars are now as brittle as old cheese, which I crumble and scatter so. Then he gasped and snatched his hands away. Each long finger was dripping blood. I must have gotten the accent wrong, he said hoarsely. He hid his hands in his cloak and tried to make his voice light. It comes and goes. A scratching of flinty phrases this time, and Schmendrick's bloody hands flickering across the sky. Something gray and grinning, something like a bear, but bigger than a bear. Something that chuckled muddily, came limping from somewhere, eager to crack the cage like a nut and pick out bits of the unicorn's flesh with its claws. Schmendrick ordered it back into the night, but it wouldn't go. The unicorn backed into a corner and lowered her head, but the harpy stirred softly in her cage, ringing, and the gray shape turned what must have been its head and saw her. It made a foggy, globbering sound of terror and was gone. The magician cursed and shivered. He said, I called him up one other time long ago. I couldn't handle him then either. Now we owe our lives to the harpy, and she may yet come to call for them before the sun rises. He stood silent, twisting his wounded fingers, waiting for the unicorn to speak. I'll try once more, he said finally. Shall I try once more? The unicorn thought that she could still see the night boiling where the gray thing had been. Yes, she said. Schmendrick took a deep breath, spat 3 times, and spoke words that sounded like bells ringing under the sea. He scattered a handful of powder over the spittle, and smiled triumphantly as it puffed up in a single silent flash of green. When the light had faded, he said 3 more words. They were like the noise bees make when buzzing on the moon. The cage began to grow smaller. The unicorn could not see the bars moving, but each time Schmendrick said, "Oh no!" she had less room in which to stand. Already she could not turn around. The bars were drawing in, pitiless as the tide or the morning, and they would shear through her until they surrounded her heart, which they would keep a prisoner forever. She had not cried out when the creature Schmendrick had summoned came grinning toward her, but now she made a sound. It was small and despairing, but not yet yielding. Schmendrick stopped the bars, though she never knew how. If he spoke any magic, she had not heard it. But the cage stopped shrinking a breath before the bars touched her body. She could feel them all the same, each one like a little cold wind, meowing with hunger. But they would not reach her. They could not reach her. The magician's arms fell to his sides. I dare no more, he said heavily. The next time I might not be able... His voice trailed miserably away, and his eyes were as defeated as his hands. The witch made no mistake in me, he said. Try again, the unicorn said. You're my friend. Try again. But Schmendrick, smiling bitterly, was fumbling through his pockets in search of something that clicked and clinked. I knew it would come to this, he muttered. I dreamed it differently, but I knew. He brought out a ring from which dangled several rusty keys. You deserve the services of a great wizard, he said to the unicorn, but I'm afraid you'll have to be glad of the aid of a second-rate pickpocket. Unicorns know not of need or shame or doubt or debt, but mortals, as you may have noticed, take what they can get, and Rook can only concentrate on one thing at a time. The unicorn was suddenly aware that every animal in the midnight carnival was awake, making no sound but watching her. In the next cage, the harpy began to stamp slowly from one foot to the other. Hurry, the unicorn said. Hurry. Schmendrick was already fitting a key into the snickering lock. At his first attempt, which failed, the lock fell silent, but when he tried another key, it cried out loudly. Ho ho, some magician, some magician. It had Mommy Fortuna's voice. I'll turn blue, the magician mumbled, but the unicorn could feel him blushing. He twisted the key and the lock snapped open with one last grunt of contempt. Schmendrick swung the cage door wide and said softly, Step down, lady. You are free. The unicorn stepped lightly to the ground, and Schmendrick the magician drew back in sudden wonder. Oh, he whispered. It was different when there were bars between us. You looked smaller, not as... Oh my. She was home in her forest, which was black and wet and ruined because she had been gone so long. Someone was calling to her from a long way off, but she was home, warming the trees and waking the grass. Then she heard Rook's voice like a boat bottom gritting on pebbles. Okay, Schmendrick, I give up. Why is a raven like her writing desk? The unicorn moved away into a deepest shadow, and Rook saw only the magician in the empty, dwindled cage. His hand jumped to his pocket and came away again. Why, you thin thief, he said, grinning iron. She'll string you on barbed wire to make a necklace for the harpy. He turned then and headed straight for Mommy Fortuna's wagon. Run, the magician said. He made a frantic, foolish flying leap and landed on Rook's back, hugging the dark man dumb and blind with his long arms. They fell together and Schmendrick scrambled up first, his knees nailing Rook's shoulders to the earth. Barbed wire, he gasped. You pile of stones, you waste, you desolation. I'll stuff you with misery till it comes out of your eyes. I'll change your heart into green grass, and all you love into a sheep. I'll turn you into a bad poet with dreams. I'll set all your toenails growing inward. You mess with me. Rook shook his head and sat up, hurling Schmendrick 10 feet away. What are you talking about? He chuckled. You can't turn cream into butter. The magician was getting to his feet, but Rook pushed him back down and sat on him. I never did like you, he said pleasantly. You give yourself airs, and you're not very strong. Heavy as night, his hands closed on the magician's throat. The unicorn did not see. She was out at the farthest cage where the manticore growled and whimpered and lay flat. She touched the point of her horn to the lock and was gone to the dragon's cage without looking back. One after another, she set them all free. The satyr, Cerberus, the Midgard serpent. Their enchantments vanished as they felt their freedom, and they leaped and lumbered and slithered away into the night. Once more a lion, an ape, a snake, a crocodile, a joyous dog. None of them thanked the unicorn, and she did not watch them go. Yeah. I'm starting to like try to like swallow again, but my throat's getting dry. Hello, cab. Hello. We're a little bit into the story, but I think you could still like get the gist. All right. Only the spider paid no mind when the unicorn called softly to her through the open door. Arachne was busy with a web which looked to her as though the Milky Way had begun to fall like snow. The unicorn whispered, "Weaver, freedom is better, freedom is better." But the spider fled unhearing up and down her iron loom. She never stopped for a moment, even when the unicorn cried, "It's really very attractive, Arachne, but it's not art." The new web drifted down the bars like snow. Then the wind began. The spider web blew across the unicorn's eyes and disappeared. The harpy had begun to beat her wings, calling her power in, as a crouching wave draws sand and water roaring down the beach. I keep getting hiccups. A bloodshot moon burst out of the clouds, and the unicorn saw her. Swollen gold, her streaming hair kindling, the cold, slow wings shaking the cage. The harpy was laughing. I need some more water. Ugh. Yeah. Okay. In the shadow of the unicorn's cage, Rook and Schmendrick were on their knees. The magician was clutching the heavy ring of keys, and Rook was rubbing his head and blinking. Their faces were blind with terror as they stared at the rising harpy, and they leaned together in the wind. It blew them against one another, and their bones rang. The unicorn began to walk toward the harpy's cage. Schmendrick the magician, tiny and pale, kept opening and closing his mouth at her, and she knew what he was shrieking, though she could not hear him. "She will kill you, she will kill you, she will kill you. Run, you fool, while she's still a prisoner. She will kill you if you set her free." But the unicorn walked on, following the light of her horn, until she stood before Seleno. I'm not sure if it's Seleno or Keleno. I'm gonna call it Seleno. Seleno, the Dark One. For an instant, the icy wings hung silent in the air like clouds, and the harpy's old yellow eyes sank into the unicorn's heart and drew her close. "I will kill you if you set me free," the eyes said. "Set me free." The unicorn lowered her head until her horn touched the lock of the harpy's cage. The door did not swing open, and the iron bars did not thaw into starlight. But the harpy lifted her wings, and the four sides of the cage fell slowly away and down, like the petals of some giant flower waking at night. And out of the wreckage the harpy bloomed, terrible and free, screaming, her hair swinging like a sword. The moon withered and fled. The unicorn heard herself cry out, not in terror but in wonder, "Oh, you are like me." She reared joyously to meet the harpy's swoop, and her horn leaped up into the wicked wind. The harpy struck once, missed, and swung away, her wings clanging and her breath warm and stinking. She burned overhead, and the unicorn saw herself reflected on the harpy's bronze breast, and felt the monster shining from her own body. So they circled one another like a double star, and under the shrunken sky there was nothing real but the two of them. The harpy laughed with delight, and her eyes turned the color of honey. The unicorn knew that she was going to strike again. The harpy folded her wings and fell like a star, not at the unicorn but beyond her, passing so close that a single feather drew blood from the unicorn's shoulder. Bright claws reaching for the heart of Mommy Fortuna, who was stretching out her own sharp hands as though to welcome the harpy home. "Not alone," the witch howled triumphantly at the both of them. "You never could have freed yourselves alone. I held you." Then the harpy reached her, and she broke like a dead stick and fell. The harpy crouched on her body, hiding it from sight, and the bronze wings turned red. The unicorn turned away. Close by, she heard a child's voice telling her that she must run. She must run. It was the magician. His eyes were huge and empty, and his face, always too young, was collapsing into childhood as the unicorn looked at him. "No," she said. "Come with me." The harpy made a thick, happy sound that melted the magician's knees, but the unicorn said again, "Come with me." And together they walked away from the midnight carnival. The moon was gone, but to the magician's eyes, the unicorn was the moon. Cold and white and very old, lighting his way to safety or to madness. He followed her, never once looking back, even when he heard the desperate scrambling and skidding of heavy feet, the boom of bronze wings and Rook's interrupted scream. He ran, the unicorn said. You must never run from anything immortal. It attracts their attention. Her voice was gentle and without pity. Never run, she said. Walk slowly and pretend to be thinking of something else. Sing a song, say a poem, do your tricks. But walk slowly, and she may not follow. Walk very slowly, magician. So they fled across the night together, step by step, the tall man in black and the horned white beast. The magician crept as close to the unicorn's light as he dared, for beyond it moved hungry shadows. The shadows of the sounds that the harpy made as she destroyed the little there was to destroy of the midnight carnival. But another sound followed them along after these had faded, followed them into morning on a strange road. The tiny, dry sound of a spider weeping. Okay, tea break. We're on to chapter 4, baby. Let's go. Oh, that time the teapot didn't stick to the warming thingy. That's good. Ooh. There we go. Alright. My voice is getting a little bit weaker. I think you could hear it. Y'all liking this background ambience, by the way? I felt it would be better if I didn't have the like auto duck on, so you could still kind of hear it while I was talking. So I just thought it was a little nice touch. Okay. Now a sip of water. Alright. Like a newborn child, the magician wept for a long time before he could speak. The poor old woman, he whispered at last. The unicorn said nothing, and Schmendrick raised his head and stared at her in a strange way. A gray morning rain was beginning to fall, and she shone through it like a dolphin. No, she said, answering his eyes. I can never regret. He was silent, crouched by the road in the rain, drawing his soaked cloak close around his body until he looked like a broken black umbrella. The unicorn waited, feeling the days of her life falling around her with the rain. I can sorrow, she offered gently, but it's not the same thing. When Schmendrick looked at her again, he had managed to pull his face together, but it was still struggling to escape from him. Where will you go now? He asked. Where were you going when she took you? I was looking for my people, the unicorn said. Have you seen them, magician? They are wild and sea-white like me. Schmendrick shook his head gravely. I have never seen anyone like you, not while I was awake. There were supposed to be a few unicorns left when I was a boy, but I knew only one man who had ever seen one. They are surely gone, lady, all but you. When you walk, you make an echo where they used to be. No, she said, for others have seen them. It gladdened her to hear that there had still been unicorns as recently as the magician's childhood. She said, a butterfly told me of the Red Bull, and the witch spoke of King Haggard. So I'm going wherever they are to learn whatever they know. Can you tell me where Haggard is king? The magician's face almost got away, but he caught it and began to smile very slowly, as though his mouth had turned to iron. He bent it into the proper shape in time, but it was an iron smile. I can tell you a poem, he said. Where all the hills are lean as knives, and nothing grows, not leaves nor lives. Where hearts are sour as boiled beer, Haggard is the ruler here. I will know when I get there then, she said, thinking that he was mocking her. Do you know any poems about the Red Bull? There are none, Schmendrick answered. He rose to his feet, pale and smiling. About King Haggard, I know only what I have heard, he said. He is an old man, stingy as late November, who rules over a barren country by the sea. Some say that the land was green and soft once before Haggard came, but he touched it and it withered. There is a saying amongst farmers when they look on a field lost to fire or locusts or the wind, as blighted as Haggard's heart. They say also that there are no lights in his castle, and no fires, and that he sends his men out to steal chickens and bedsheets and pies from windowsills. The story has it that the last time King Haggard laughed, the unicorn stamped her foot. Schmendrick said, As for the Red Bull, I know less than I have heard, for I have heard too many tales, and each argues with another. The bull is real, the bull is a ghost. The bull is Haggard himself when the sun goes down. The bull was in the land before Haggard, or it came with him, or it came to him. It protects him from raids and revolutions and saves him the expense of arming his men. It keeps him a prisoner in his own castle. It is the devil to whom Haggard has sold his soul. It is the thing he sold his soul to possess. The bull belongs to Haggard. Haggard belongs to the bull. The unicorn felt a shiver of sureness spreading through her, widening from the center like a ripple. In her mind, the butterfly piped again. They passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footprints. She saw white forms blowing away in a bellowing wind, and yellow horns shaking. I will go there, she said. Magician, I owe you a boon, for you set me free. What would you have of me before I leave you? Schmendrick's long eyes were glinting like leaves in the sun. Take me with you. She moved away, cool and dancing, and she did not answer. The magician said, I might be useful. I know the way into Haggard's country, and the languages of the lands between here and there. The unicorn seemed very near to vanishing into a sticky mist, and Schmendrick hurried on. Besides, no wander was ever the worse for a wizard's company, even a unicorn. Remember the tale of the great wizard Nikos. Once in the woods, he beheld a unicorn sleeping with his head in the lap of a giggling virgin, while 3 hunters advanced with drawn bows to slay him for his horn. Nikos had only a moment to act. With a word and a wave, he changed the unicorn into a handsome young man, who woke, and seeing the astonished bowmen gaping there, charged upon them and killed them all. His sword was of a twisted, tapering design, and he trampled the bodies where the men were dead, or when the men were dead. I need some water. And the girl, the unicorn asked. Did he kill the girl too? No, he married her. He said she was only an aimless child, angry at her family, and that all she really needed was a good man. Which he was, then and always, for even Nikos could never give him back his first form. He died old and respected, of a surfeit of violets, some say. He could never get enough violets. There were no children. The story lodged itself somewhere in the unicorn's breath. The magician did him no service, but great ill, she said softly. How terrible it would be if all my people had been turned human by well-meaning wizards, exiled, trapped in burning houses. I would sooner find that the Red Bull had killed them all. Where you are going now, Schmendrick answered. Few will mean you anything but evil, and a friendly heart, however foolish, may be as welcome as water one day. Take me with you, for laughs, for luck, for the unknown. Take me with you. The rain faded as he spoke. The sky began to clear, and the wet grass glowed like the inside of a seashell. The unicorn looked away, searching through a fog of kings for one king, and through a snowy glitter of castles and palaces for one built on the shoulders of a bull. No one has ever traveled with me, she said. But then no one ever caged me before, or took me for a white mare, or disguised me as myself. Many things seem determined to happen to me for the first time, and your company will surely not be the strangest of them, nor the last. So you may come with me if you like, though I wish you had asked me for some other reward. Schmendrick smiled sadly. I thought about it. He looked at his fingers, and the unicorn saw the half-moon marks where the bars had bitten him. But you could never have granted me my true wish. There it is, the unicorn thought, feeling the first spidery touch of sorrow on the inside of her skin. That is how it will be to travel with a mortal all the time. No, she replied. I cannot turn you into something you are not, no more than the witch could. I cannot turn you into a true magician. I didn't think so, Schmendrick said. It's all right. Don't worry about it. I'm not worrying about it, the unicorn said. A blue jay swooped low over them on that first day of their journey, said, well, I'll be a squab under glass, and flapped straight home to tell his wife about it. She was sitting on the nest singing to their children in a dreary tone. Spiders and sow-bugs and beetles and crickets, slugs from the roses and ticks from the thickets, grasshoppers, snails, and a quail's egg or two, all to be regurgitated for you. Lullaby, lullaby, swindles and schemes. Flying is not near as much fun as it seems. Saw a unicorn today, the blue jay said as he lit. You didn't see any supper, I notice, his wife replied coldly. I hate a man who talks with his mouth empty. Baby, a unicorn. The jay abandoned his casual air and hopped up and down on the branch. I haven't seen one of those since the time... You've never seen one, she said. This is me, remember? I know what you've seen in your life and what you haven't. The jay paid no attention. There was a strange-looking party in black with her, he rattled. They were going over Cat Mountain. I wonder if they were heading for Haggard's country. He cocked his head to the artistic angle that had first won his wife. What a vision for old Haggard's breakfast, he marveled. A unicorn coming to call, bold as you please. Rat-tat-tat on his dismal door. I'd give anything to see. I suppose the two of you didn't spend the whole day watching unicorns, his wife interrupted with a click of her beak. At least I understand that she used to be considered quite imaginative in matters of spare time. She advanced on him, her neck feathers ruffling. Honey, I haven't even seen her, the blue jay began, and his wife knew that he hadn't, and wouldn't dare, but she batted him one anyway. She was one woman who knew what to do with a slight moral edge. The unicorn and the magician walked through the spring, over soft Cat Mountain and down into a violet valley where apple trees grew. Beyond the valley were low hills, as fat and docile as sheep, lowering their heads to sniff at the unicorn in wonder as she moved among them. After these came the slow heights of summer, and the baked plains where the air hung shiny as candy. Together, she and Schmendrick forded rivers, scrambled up and down brambly banks and bluffs, and wandered in woods that reminded the unicorn of her home, though they could never resemble it, having known time. So has my forest now, she thought. But she told herself that it did not matter, that all would be as before when she returned. At night, while Schmendrick slept the sleep of a hungry, footsore magician, the unicorn crouched awake, waiting to see the vast form of the Red Bull come charging out of the moon. At times, she caught what she was sure was his smell, a dark, sly reek easing through the midnight, reaching out to find her. Then she would spring to her feet with a cold cry of readiness, only to find 2 or 3 deer gazing at her from a respectable distance. Deer love and envy unicorns. Once a buck in his second summer, prodded forward by his giggling friends, came quite close to her and mumbled without meeting her eyes, "You are very beautiful. You are just as beautiful as our mother said." The unicorn looked silently back at him, knowing that he expected no answer from her. The other deer snickered and whispered, "Go on, go on." Then the buck raised his head and cried out swiftly and joyously, "But I know someone more beautiful than you." He wheeled and dashed away in the moonlight, and his friends followed him. The unicorn lay down again. Now and then in their journey they came to a village, and there Schmendrick would introduce himself as a wandering wizard, offering as he cried in the streets, "To sing for my supper, to bother you just a little bit, to trouble your sleep ever so slightly and pass on." Few were the towns where he was not invited to stable his beautiful white mare and stay the night, and before the children went to bed he would perform in the market square by lantern light. He never actually attempted any greater magic than making dolls talk and turning soap into sweets, and even this trifling sorcery sometimes slipped from his hands. But the children liked him, and their parents were kindly with supper, and the summer evenings were lithe and soft. Ages after, the unicorn still remembered the strange chocolate stable smell, and Schmendrick's shadow dancing on walls and doors and chimneys in the leaping light. Alright. In the mornings they went on their way, Schmendrick's pockets full of bread and cheese and oranges, and the unicorn pacing beside him, sea white in the sun, sea green in the dark of the trees. His tricks were forgotten before he was out of sight, but his white mare troubled the nights of many a villager, and there were women who woke weeping from dreams of her. One evening they stopped in a plump, comfortable town where even the beggars had double chins and the mice waddled. Schmendrick was immediately asked to dinner with the mayor and several of the rounder councilmen, and the unicorn, unrecognized as always, was turned loose in a pasture where the grass grew sweet as milk. Dinner was served out of doors, at a table in the square, for the night was warm and the mayor was pleased to show off his guest. It was an excellent dinner. During the meal, Schmendrick told stories of his life as an errant enchanter, filling it with kings and dragons and noble ladies. He was not lying, merely organizing events more sensibly, and so his tales had a taste of truth even to the canny councilmen. Not only they, but all the matter of folk passing in the street leaned forward to understand the nature of the spell that opened all locks, if properly applied. And there was not a one but lost a breath at sight of the marks on the magician's fingers. "Souvenir of my encounter with a harpy," Schmendrick explained calmly. "They bite." "And were you ever afraid?" a young girl wondered softly. The mayor made a shooing noise at her, but Schmendrick lit a cigar and smiled at her through the smoke. "Fear and hunger have kept me young," he replied. He looked around the circle of dozing, rumbling councilmen and winked widely at the girl. The mayor was not offended. "It's true," he sighed, caressing his dinner with linked fingers. "We do lead a good life here. Or if we don't, I don't know anything about it. I sometimes think that a little fear, a little hunger, might be good for us. Sharpen our souls, so to speak. That's why we always welcome strangers with tales to tell and songs to sing. They broaden our outlook, set us to looking inward. He yawned and stretched himself, gurgling. One of the councilmen suddenly remarked, "My word, look at the pasture." Heavy heads turned on nodding necks, and all saw the village's cows and sheep and horses clustered at the far end of the field, staring at the magician's white mare, who was placidly cropping the cool grass. No animal made a noise. Even the pigs and geese were as silent as ghosts. A crow called once far away, and his cry drifted through the sunset like a single cinder. "Remarkable," the mayor murmured. "Most remarkable." "Yes, isn't she?" the magician agreed. "If I were to tell you some of the offers I've had for her." "The interesting thing," said the councilman who had spoken first, "is that they don't seem to be afraid of her. They have an air of awe, as though they were doing her some sort of reverence. They see what you have forgotten how to see." Schmendrick had drunk his share of red wine, and the young girl was staring at him with eyes both sweeter and shallower than the unicorn's eyes. He thumped his glass on the table and told the smiling mayor, "She is a rarer creature than you dare to dream. She is a myth, a memory, a will-o'-the-wish, wail-o'-the-wisp. If you remembered, if you hungered." His voice was lost in a gust of hoofbeats and the clamor of children. A dozen horsemen dressed in autumn rags came galloping into the square, howling and laughing, scattering the townsfolk like marbles. They formed a line and clattered around the square, knocking over whatever came in their way, and shrieking incomprehensible brags and challenges to no one in particular. One rider rose up in his saddle, bent his bow, and shot the weathercock off the church spire. Another snatched up Schmendrick's hat, jammed it on his own head, and rode on roaring. Some swung screaming children to their saddle bows, and others contented themselves with wineskins and sandwiches. Their eyes gleamed madly in their shaggy faces, and their laughter was like drums. The round mayor stood fast until he caught the eye of the raiders' leader. Then he raised one eyebrow. The man snapped his fingers, and immediately the horses were still, and the ragged men as silent as the village animals before the unicorn. They put the children gently on the ground and gave back most of the wineskins. "Jack Jingley, if you please," the mayor said calmly. The leader of the horsemen dismounted and walked slowly toward the table where the councilmen and their guests had dined. He was a huge man, nearly 7 feet tall, and at every step he rang and jangled because of the rings and bells and bracelets that were sewn to his patched jerkin. "Evening, Your Honor," he said in a gruff chuckle. "Let's get this business over with," the mayor told him. "I don't see why you can't come riding in quietly like civilized people." The boys don't mean no harm, Your Honor," the giant grumbled good-naturedly. "Cooped up in the greenwood all day. They needs a little relaxin', a little catharsis like. Well to it, eh?" With a sigh, he took a wizened bag of coins from his waist and placed it in the mayor's open hand. "There you be, Your Honor," said Jack Jingley. "It ben't much, but we can't spare no more than that." The mayor poured the coins into his palm and pushed at them with a fat finger, grunting. "It certainly isn't much," he complained. "It isn't even as much as last month's take, and that was shriveled enough. You're a woeful lot of freebooters, you are." "It's hard times," Jack Jingley answered sullenly. "We been to blame if travelers have no more gold than we. You can't squeeze blood out of a turnip, you know." "I can," the mayor said. He scowled savagely and shook his fist at the giant outlaw. "And if you're holding out on me," he shouted, "if you're feathering your own pockets at my expense, I'll squeeze you, my friend. I'll squeeze you into a pulp and peel and let the wind take you. Be off now and tell it to your tattered captain. Away, villains." As Jack Jingley turned away muttering, Schmendrick cleared his throat and said hesitantly, "I'll have my hat if you don't mind." The giant stared at him out of bloodshot buffalo eyes, saying nothing. "My hat," Schmendrick requested in a firmer voice. "One of your men took my hat, and it would be wise for him to return it." "Wise, is it?" grunted Jack Jingley at last. "And who be you, pray, that knows what wisdom is?" The wine was still leaping in Schmendrick's own eyes. "I am Schmendrick the magician, and I make a bad enemy," he declared. "I am older than I look, and less amiable. My hat." Jack Jingley regarded him a few moments longer. Then he walked back to his horse, stepped over it, and sat down in the saddle. He rode forward till he was hardly a beard's thickness from the waiting Schmendrick. "Nah, then," he boomed. "If you be a magician, do summat tricksy. Turn my nose green, fill my saddlebags with snow, disappear my beard. Show me some magic, or show me your heels." He pulled a rusty dagger from his belt and dangled it by the point, whistling maliciously. "The magician is my guest," the mayor warned, but Schmendrick said solemnly, "Very well. On your head be it." Making sure with the edge of his eye that the young girl was watching him, he pointed at the Scarecrow crew grinning behind their leader and said something that rhymed. Instantly, his black hat snatched itself from the fingers of the man who held it and floated away through the darkening air, silent as an owl. Two women fainted, and the mayor sat down. The outlaws cried out in children's voices. Down the length of the square sailed the black hat, as far as a horse trough where it dipped low and scooped itself full of water. Then, almost invisible in the shadows, it came drifting back, apparently aiming straight for the unwashed hat of Jack Jingley. He covered himself with his hands, muttering, "Nah, nah, call it off." And even his own men snickered in anticipation. Schmendrick smiled triumphantly and snapped his fingers to hasten the hat. But as it neared the outlaw leader, the hat's flight began to curve, gradually at first, then much more sharply, as it bent toward the councilman's table. The mayor had just time to lunge to his feet before the hat settled itself comfortably on his head. Schmendrick ducked in time, but a couple of the closer councilmen were slightly splattered. In the roar of laughter, varyingly voluntary that went up, Jack Jingley leaned from his horse and swept up Schmendrick the magician, who was trying to dry the sputtering mayor with the tablecloth. "I misdoubt you'll be asked for encores," the giant bellowed in his ear. "You'd best come with us." He threw Schmendrick face down across his saddle bow and galloped away, followed by his shabby cohorts. Their snorts and belches and guffaws lingered in the square long after the sound of hooves had died away. Men came running to ask the mayor if they should pursue to rescue the magician, but he shook his wet head, saying, "I hardly think it will be necessary. If our guest is the man he claims to be, he should be able to take care of himself quite well. And if he isn't, why then, an impostor taking advantage of our hospitality has no claim on us for assistance. No, never mind about him." Creeks were running down his jowls to join the brooks of his neck and the river of his shirt front, but he turned his placid gaze toward the pasture, where the magician's white mare glimmered in the darkness. Oh, excuse me. Good Lord. She was trotting back and forth before the fence, making no sound. The mayor said softly, "I think it might be well to take good care of our departed friend's mount, since he evidently prized her so highly." He sent 2 men to the pasture with instructions to rope the mare and put her in the strongest stall of his own stable. But the men had not yet reached the pasture gate when the white mare jumped the fence and was gone into the night like a falling star. The The two men stood where they were for a time, not heeding the mayor's commands to come back. And neither ever said, even to the other, why he stared after the magician's mare so long. But now and then after that, they laughed with wonder in the middle of very serious events, and so came to be considered frivolous sorts. Alright, I mean, that's 5 chapters under our belt. We're on like page 36, which isn't much, but it's still like about like a quarter of the way through. So I think that's how many chapters are there in here? Let's see. 14 chapters. So honestly, we're closer to about like a third of the way through, if you really think about it. But yeah, it seems like that's gonna be my stopping point. It's yeah, I'm digging it so far. I'm really I like the setting. I like it. It's nice. Let me take a sip of my tea. And let me think for a second. So tomorrow I'm doing another stream. We are gonna be doing we're gonna be doing Reader Rabbit, because I was gonna do it last week, but then I like got sick and like my power went out also. I mean, not the power, but like the internet, because there was like a storm. I hope there's not another storm tomorrow, because I really want to do this. I have like an opening bit that I think would be funny, and I really want to be able to do that. So that's on the menu for tomorrow, and I hope people join, because I worked hard on it. But yeah, I guess that's kind of it for me. So yeah, I guess I'm just gonna sign off here. So I hope everybody has a good morning, evening, afternoon, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And I love you.